Privacy is how much information you're personally prepared to give someone.
It just means you have a right to choose what you want to disclose to the public.
We should at least have a certain kind of privacy in our lives.
Well, I own the tempora has been reported in the press as the means by which the GCHQ screen both internet messages and mobile phones. They don't collect content, but this is getting what's called the metadata, which is the records of calls that are made and internet contacts that are made.
You can use your publicly available Facebook data and analyze it and put you into categories, whether you are left or right, conservative, potentially gay or bisexual, whether your parents were even divorced when you were a child. With data retention, metadata, you can look at known criminals, look at their communication patterns, and then look for these patterns at other retained data. So it's no longer a real crime that makes you suspicious, it's the way you communicate. It's the people you communicate with. So these are all things that are out of our control. Now our social circle is making us more or less suspicious. And an algorithm decides whether we end up in a criminal database or on a no-fly list, or our credit ratings are degraded.
I think the real risk here is a violation of the series of human rights that are contained in this unaccountable, vast and mass surveillance of innocent people around the world. First of all, what is important is that mass surveillance creates a chilling effect on the right to freedom of expression of individuals. If government and the companies monitor everything you do on the internet, your ability to seek the information, to impart the information through internet and new technologies is going to be seriously inhibited.
You know, I think if you were actually maybe sending something of like a sensitive nature,
Yeah.
you probably, you know, you probably want a bit more careful because you think people probably can access.
So then the only way to really protect your privacy is if you never
Not have
have
a digital
anything,
footprint.
never have anything physical. Literally to not speak to anyone
Or
or
just
do
talk about it.
anything ever.
Sit in your house.
Yeah.
The second serious violations here is the violation of the right to privacy, but also other human rights, such as the right to due process, the right to be considered innocent before proven guilty.
The worst part of surveillance is what happens afterwards, because it implies a huge shift of power to the person who's collecting the information. The question is what they do with that information afterwards. And where we are at now is that GCHQ and the secret services in the UK can make a judgment about anybody at all, and when they want to investigate them, when they want to examine what they've been reading, who they've been talking to, and decide how to use that information, whether that's for intimidation, whether it's for blackmail, whether it's to arrest them, whether it's to be used as a basis of attempting to stop them from carrying on with awkward behaviour. It doesn't matter whether you're a journalist, a politician, or simply somebody who's in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The issue about balancing powers and transparency and openness and intrusion versus privacy and so on, and all of these balances that are critically important in a free society and a democracy like the United Kingdom, these are matters principally for ministers to lead on and for Parliament to set law about, that we then abide by and are overseen in the work we do in our compliance.
Frankly, we've never had a public debate about any of this. Some of the actions are borderline criminal, if not actually criminal. And frankly, the democratic country, the things that Snowden revealed, shouldn't happen without the public and Parliament giving their consent.
I don't know very much about the programme that you mentioned. There were obviously a number of reports in the newspapers, but I do not have any detailed knowledge of that sort of programme.
I became aware of it as a result of the Guardian disclosures.
Well, I think the first we all knew about all of these programmes to try to increase surveillance from things which we hadn't realised were being monitored was when we read about it in the Guardian after the Snowden revelation.
Well, like everyone, I was informed about Tempora when I read about it in The Guardian.
When The Guardian published Snowden's discoveries, had it not been for The Guardian, had it not been for Snowden, we would never have known.
Not only we collectively as a society, but even the democratic people who are supposed to control our security services didn't know about. And that is extremely disturbing. We may have suspected things happening in the past, but now we really know just how much the tentacles of that secret surveillance is extended into every aspect of our lives.
You know, sadly, it's not a surprise to me that members of parliament and other members of power are not aware of the extent of the surveillance state that's being done, even by their own governments, because the secrecy has been so great. In the government in the United States, we see in the legal fights the Department of Justice trying to pretend like Congress knew. And meanwhile, we have members of Congress going, I didn't know. And I think the same is probably true in Britain.
Not all members of the government are or need to be aware of all the activities of the intelligence services, but the legislation about the intelligence services, and indeed the sort of thing that they do, is not particularly secret.
Well, truth be told, nobody had imagined anything on this scale because it was millions and millions of data collections virtually every day and huge quantities of data being stored. But nobody had imagined that because nobody really thought the law would allow it. In truth, the law does allow it, but only really through a spectacular loophole.
When you have one part of the government keeping things secret from the democratically elected part of the government, that's when things are really broken. And that's when the democratically elected government is not in control.
Of course, it would have been better, I think, if the public had been more generally aware of both the legislation and the capabilities of GCHQ. There was a good deal of discussion about it last year, when there was a proposal for the government for a bill to widen the records that were kept by internet and mobile telephone providers. And so there was a good deal of public discussion about it at that time. So I think it's just a question of what the public are conscious of, really.
I think that in Britain we simply haven't had the kind of debate from our politicians and the media that we should have done, and I think that is leading to the public feeling, on the one hand, their own concern about this, but on the other hand, not having that concern validated by people that they expect to be telling them when there's a problem.
Well, three people really. The government, the elected politicians, the Parliamentary Committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee, and the commissioners, who are former judges who have access to all the warrants and the activities of GCHQ, and whose job it is to assure themselves that they're within the law. Now, to be within the law, they have got to be not only legal, but necessary and proportionate.
When I worked on the Communications Data Bill, we found that there were some 570,000 requests for communications data already. So that's information about where you used your phone, who you texted, all sorts of different things under the current existing law, completely separate from anything else, anything Snowden related or anything that was in the bill. 570,000 requests from a whole range of organisations. But it was phenomenally hard to get information about who was making those requests, which body was it? How many people they applied to? Were there 1,000 requests for information about one person? Or was it the other way around, that one request could relate to 1,000 people? How many people were actually affected? And for what reason? Was this a serious national security counter-terrorism operation, or was it an effort to find out whether a child was being put in a school where their parents didn't actually live in a catchment area? Most of us would have a very different sense of proportionality. We could not get that sort of information. Eventually forced the Home Office to do a 2-week snapshot survey where they found some information, but even they didn't have much more, to include the fact that a lot of it was used for what was beautifully categorised as other non-crime. Which doesn't sound very serious to me.
Well, the original intention of the ISC, I took the Act of Parliament through Parliament that created the ISC, and the original intention was it would evolve into more and more of a select committee, become far more independent of the state, and yet at the same time keep the trust of the agencies. I'm afraid that hasn't worked. Nobody really believes the ISC gets the full picture. If you talk to the spooks, they tell you they don't get 10% of the picture. They don't know what to ask for because they don't know what's going on. So in truth, the ISC has become more of a spokesman for the agencies than it has been an oversight agency for Parliament. It acts for the Prime Minister, who himself controls the agencies. So this is not an accountability system so much as an explanatory system.
They talk of the terms, as do others, mass surveillance. That we are living in a society where there is mass surveillance. If that means anything as an accusation, the inference is that all our emails are being examined or are going to be examined by the agencies, by GCHQ, at their own choice and through their own methods. That somehow that is now something which is available. The computers are programmed to go through millions and millions of communications information and discard all of them without ever looking at it. No human eye looks at any of these emails, of any of these matters that do not have these selectors attached to them. So of the totality that a computer might be processing, perhaps 0.01% will have the selectors that have been programmed into it to look for.
I think it is really difficult to know whether you can trust politicians if you're just a member of the public, but I would just ask this: do the politicians have the technical understanding? Are they paying attention? Or are they simply saying to themselves, the Secret Services are trustworthy, I trust my government to make sure that these issues are handled properly, therefore I am going to take it as read that this is okay.
The safeguards in place, the oversight in place is very rigorous in our case. But it would be bizarre to think that the one area which should be excluded from taking full advantage of modern technology is keeping this country safe. We've got an extraordinarily difficult task, as Andrew has just described. We have to identify and recruit agents in the most exposed places, in the higher reaches of Al-Qaeda, in countries which are trying to do our country harm, secret states that are trying to do damage to us.
When you come to dealing with national security matters, public opinion tends to rally around and be fairly strongly in favour of it. But they're also nervous about the control and vulnerability of their own data, and I think they're also mindful when they see powers designed for national security or counter-terrorism being used for other purposes.
The idea that terrorists don't know the sort of surveillance that can and does go on is really very naive. For example, when the Americans found Osama bin Laden, what was one of the big indicators that there was somebody special staying in that compound? No communications at all. No web, no phones, nothing. And nobody walked out when the satellites were by. Nobody walked out around when the satellites were over. So, again, sometimes the self-defense actually gives them away. So I don't think you can make an assumption that Al-Qaeda is ignorant of these things. Just the reverse. They're better informed than you and I are. So what's the result of that? You sweep up you and me, you don't sweep up the terrorists.
When we gather that haystack, and remember it's not a haystack from the home field, it's a haystack from a tiny proportion of that field, We are very, very well aware that within that haystack there's going to be plenty of hay which is innocent communications from innocent people, not just British, foreign people as well. And so we design our queries against that data to draw out the needles, and we do not intrude upon, if you like, the surrounding hay.
We hear from the government is that they have to create a very giant haystack in order to find the needle. Well, first of all, I think that misunderstands the metaphor. It actually means the opposite, that the bigger the haystack, the harder it is to find the needle. And I think we should police the government on using bad metaphors. But more seriously, it's just not the case. And one of the problems that has been reported by the Inspector Generals in the United States is that the collection of all this information has the agency drowning in information and unable to find the needles, forcing the agencies to be more targeted in what they collect in the first place gives them a better shot at finding the bad guys.
But let me put it like this. If you are a terrorist, a serious criminal, a proliferator, a foreign intelligence target, or if your activities pose a genuine threat to the national or economic security of the United Kingdom, there is a possibility that your communications will be monitored, as in we will seek to read, we will seek to listen to you. If you're not, and if you're not in contact with one of those people, then you won't be. We're not entitled to. And that's true, actually, whether you're British, if you're foreign, and wherever you are in the world.
We hear from government officials a lot, and we hear it in the lawsuits as well, is, well, we're collecting everything, but don't worry, trust us, we're not looking at any of it. I think that is an attempt by those officials to try to confuse people about what they're doing. Because what they're doing is they're running computer algorithms through the entire set of data that they're collecting, looking for hits, which means that they are looking at everything. It's the computers that are looking instead of humans that are looking, but I don't think that's a difference that should make anybody feel safer. Computers are actually much more efficient, but also make many more mistakes.
Personal view is that I don't believe that if in the UK, as elsewhere, if you're conducting your business, if you're going about your business and you're not involved in terrorist activity or serious crime, you have nothing to worry about being monitored in any way, and that's what our intelligence chiefs have spoken about. That is what the government, the parliamentary committee is monitoring. That needs to continue to be monitored. There's clearly a discussion about technology and as it changes. That's my view, and frankly, if somebody wants to look at my emails, they're very welcome to. I think they'll be deeply disappointed.
I think there's a lot of politicians who have a great deal to hide, not because they've done anything wrong, but because different things mean different things to different people. Anybody who uses that as an argument for mass surveillance, frankly, I think needs to think about their own lives a little more carefully, and then ask, in a free society, is it really the way we should do things? To say that we should monitor everybody, because that's how you find wrongdoing. That's exactly the argument that authoritarian regimes have made for decades, and I think in Britain we're better than that.
Part of the problem with all these mass surveillance programs is they collect enormous amounts of data about everything, and you have to know what's going to happen in the future to try to guess whether this data is going to become relevant. Interesting example from the US is in the early 2000s, if you were a Muslim living in America, your religion tells you to donate to nonprofits and not ask too many questions about what the nonprofits do. And then suddenly some people fly some planes into some buildings and you're a terrorist because you've been aiding and abetting certain groups.
Politicians that use those glib lines, I think they fail to understand just how worried a generation of innate digital users are about this. And they're not going to be in Parliament very much longer if they hold that kind of ancient and belligerent view. That we need to be more enlightened.
It's really scary, the fact that the thought that you would never be able to have anything to yourself.
The problem is you can agree to it, but what you don't know is what's going to happen when you agree to it, because the government sell it, lose it, and then it's out of control.
there's an argument that there's a reason why they do it, but I don't like the idea that they can measure who I am by short bursts of information and not see me in context. So they're looking for negative stuff, not looking for positive stuff. I find that's the bit I find quite dangerous, like keywords and stuff like that. So I find it quite dangerous.
We are changing. Socially, we are changing from having conversations face to face to having a large proportion of our conversations online. Now, if the agency said, well, we're going to, because you might talk to a terrorist, we're going to bug your house, we think it's ridiculous. But actually, by effectively monitoring the internet so closely, they're doing something very similar. They're doing the equivalent of saying everybody who comes in and out of your front door in a day. Well, you'd object if that happened, but the electronic equivalent is exactly what's happening. So it's very corrosive in many ways and can be misused by many people.
I think the build-up to the 2015 general election gives a great opportunity for British citizens to come together and demand a wholly new approach to personal privacy in the online space. And I hope that the Open Rights Group will lead the way in bringing citizens together to demand manifesto commitments from the political parties.
The Open Rights Group, along with a coalition of organisations, has formed the Don't Spy on Us coalition, and we're calling for 6 fundamental reforms to surveillance. We want no surveillance without suspicion, transparent laws, not secret laws, judicial, not political authorisation of surveillance, effective democratic oversight, the right to redress, and a secure web for all. All of those things are currently not existent. They are completely reasonable things for us to be asking. Sign the Don't Spy on Us coalition's petition, sign up to these principles and state your support, contact your MP, get involved with our local groups who are campaigning on these issues, who are going to try to make this the biggest issues in the election next year.